Namaste, Jai Bharat. There are some difficulties when we translate concepts into some other language. We in Bharat have this concept most. These difficulties we have most. For example, we have concepts in Sanskrit. Most of the Bharatiya concepts are essentially rooted and based in Sanskriti. And the Sanskrit concepts can't just be translated into, especially a European language like English, without really losing its content. Examples are plenty. For instance, the English concept of heaven is absolutely different from the Bharatiya concept of Swarga. Many cases. The concept of God itself we can take. For instance, the concept of God is entirely different in Bharatiya knowledge tradition and in the Semitic knowledge tradition. Different concepts. Similarly, we also have a concept of Sanskriti, which is translated roughly into English as culture. And people mostly shall innocently think that Sanskriti is culture and culture is Sanskriti. They are synonyms. But really that's not the case. They're very different. Let me unpack the concept of Sanskriti as against the concept of culture. If you speak, let's try to speak culture, which is rather simple. What is culture per se? We may be able to understand culture as some kind of refinement, purification. That is, say in one word, if I'm allowed, I should say culture as a refined human existence or refined collective human existence. That's refined existence. Somehow, through continuous interaction with one individual to another, like those pebbles in the stream, flowing stream. You look at the pebbles in the flowing stream; they are very fine shaped, very fine shaped they are. Where the same brother pebble, which must have been a part of a greater rock once upon a time, which is not in the stream, continues to remain sharp and rough, unpolished. The pebbles in the stream gets polished because they continuously come into interaction with one another, and so on, and they get into some kind of shape. Whatever shape it is smooth. They acquire smoothness. So, human question of refinement is also something akin to that when man comes into interaction with other men continuously, there develops a kind of smoothness, which we call in the human realm as refinement. So it's refined human existence we call as culture. Refined, refining in the sense whatever is available, impurities we remove, or to whatever possible extent we do away with the impurities, and whatever is noble, whatever is lofty remains back. And nobility is a different concept, very confusing concept. Hardly any people do speak about nobility these days, and hardly any people appreciate nobility these days. But I haven't seen many people speaking of nobility these days. Anyway, so this is what culture is. Now, how Sanskriti is different from culture is what I would like to speak on. Sanskriti is also refined human existence, undoubtedly. Sanskriti is also refined human existence with some additions as compared to culture. Number one, the fundamental first difference is that Sanskriti is not simply refinement based on continuous interaction. It's a refinement based on a knowledge tradition. In Bharatiya context, the knowledge tradition is essentially the Veda-Upanishadic knowledge tradition. So, Sanskriti is an expression on the basis of knowledge tradition. The Veda-Upanishadic knowledge tradition, which has its own ingredients in it, which has its own structure and superstructure. Of course, when I use the word structure and superstructure conveniently for my convenience, not borrowing anything, not like anything what is commonly used. So, see, on the basis of the Veda Upanishadic knowledge tradition, the refinement takes place. Now, the difference between Sanskriti and culture is that culture is only continuous human interaction, but Sanskriti is based on knowing things. So, the refinement largely owes its origin to knowing things, not simply interacting with one another, which is peripheral, mostly peripheral, but this is a deep level kind of things. So it's awareness, it's consciousness, it's knowing things. On the basis of that, you get refined. If you recall the expression which Maharishi Gautama says, he speaks about knowledge. Maharishi Gautama, he says, knowledge, what's the name, must have the property of affecting the knower. And knowing information, if it is not yet become knowledge, information that comes to a person, if when it affects the person, then only it becomes knowledge. And the process of affecting is very interesting. Gautama speaks very clearly and categorically. It should affect the knowing person and refine him. And there's a process of refinement or a refining process that should take place in the person who acquires information. So, if the information is capable of refining the knower into a refined human being, then that information gets called as knowledge, otherwise not. Clearly says, information or knowledge, what's the name, must have the property of affectivity, affecting the knower. That is refining the knower. That is making the knower more refined. Refinement in the sense is getting rid of the impurities or unwanted elements of the human existence. Similarly, as knowledge refines human beings, not merely interactions like pebbles. Knowledge refines a human being, which is a very, very intent, very deep and intense kind of refinement that takes place in human being. That is the process of refinement. In Sanskrit, that process is well called as sputtîkarana. Sputtîkarana, the sputata, the refinement comes from knowing things. So, first difference in Sanskriti and culture is that in Sanskriti, the refinement process is based on an established knowledge tradition, which is a Veda Upanishadic knowledge tradition, as I've told you, and then it is a second ingredient to it, which is not there in culture. The second ingredient is that when a person is based on knowing, when a person is refined on the basis of knowing, it's automatic that he develops a longing towards the transcendental. Now, to understand transcendental, you must already have traveled quite a length in the way of knowing, in the ways of knowing. So, it is, Sanskriti is, a refined human existence on the basis of the Veda Upanishadic knowledge tradition with an inbuilt longing towards the transcendental. That is Sanskriti. And culture is simply refined human existence on the basis of continuous interaction with one another. This is something like we speak of the formation of society. Of course, European societies are not really formed, must have not really formed like Locke and Rousseau says. Locke and Rousseau say that societies are formed on the basis of man intentionally coming into contract with one another, surrendering some of the so-called freedoms. This is Puri's concept, freedom here. Freedom for everyone's meaningful, comfortable coexistence. That is a social contract theory says, but that's not the case. When we understand society, I've talked about it some time back, our relations are not based on contract. Our relations are not based on mutual benefits, or at least my benefit. Your benefit is your lookout, so I don't care. So our relations are not based on my benefit. Our relations are based on a concept of Tyaga. And that is the archetype Hindu mind. That's the archetype Bharatiya knowledge mind. It's not necessary that every Hindu should live through Tyaga. It's not really not necessary, because We are an open world. People come in contact with different kinds of people. Now, those things are always there. I'm not creating an ideal situation, but I'm talking about an ideal which exists, which people can approximate. People do approximate, they can approximate, they will keep doing this approximation business. It will go on. So, let's be very clear about what Sanskriti is and what culture is. You can't help it. You really continue translating Sanskriti as culture. You can't help it. But that doesn't mean that Sanskriti can be synonymous with culture. These two are different things. This is only one example. In the entire Sanskrit tradition, we have similar concepts. What is meant here is entirely different when you get this thing translated into another language. For instance, English. For us, right now, it is a question of English. So there are so many things coming. Maybe with something else, I'll come again later. So till then, Namaste, Jai Bharat, and Jai Sri Ram.